Aloha mai kako. Uh, my name is Willie Bagasol, co-chair of the Hawaii Supreme Court's Committee on Equality and Access to the Courts. And on behalf of SEEK, I want to extend our heartfelt mahalo to our partners and co-sponsors at the King Kamehameha V Judiciary History Center and the Hawaii State Bar Association Civic Education Committee for helping make the 2025 Equitable and Sustainable Future Speaker Series possible. SEEK first hosted this speaker series in 2021, then called the Racial Equity Series, during the height of the COVID-19 epidemic and the aftermath of George Floyd's tragic murder. From January through May of 2021, SEEK held 6 virtual programs drawing over 1,800 attendees. Representatives from across our state's justice system were brought together in meaningful public conversation. Attendees were surveyed about criminal justice reform, most important to them, and the series as a whole influenced what issues the Committee on Equality and Access to the Courts considered, considered taking action on the legislative level in 2022. The overarching goal of SEEK's speaker series is to continue collaboration initiated 4 years ago, forge new partnerships across departments and agencies, and facilitate the critical exchange of ideas and strategies. Our efforts aim to improve the administration of justice in Hawaii and develop sustainable, creative solutions for the future and of our community's safety and well-being. Our kickoff tonight, originally scheduled for January 30th, is presented in honor of civil liberties and the Constitution Day, which the state recognizes every January 30th since Governor Neil Abercrombie signed Act 94 on June 7, 2013. Since its designation in 2013, the Judiciary History Center and the Hawaii State Bar Association Civic Education Committee have hosted public programs to honor individuals dedicated to preserving civil liberties and promoting equal rights for all citizens. Tonight, we gather and reflect on our justice system, over-incarceration, and issues such as overrepresentation of Native Hawaiians and other groups in our prisons and in the criminal justice system is something that is very real. Tonight, I look forward to the discussion about these important topics, as well as the possible solution and changes. And to speak about the changes and impacts of our courts, it is my distinct honor to welcome Chief Justice Mark Rechtenwald to the podium.
Good evening, aloha everyone. Welcome both those in person and online to Ali'i Lani Hale tonight. It's wonderful to be with you for the first event of this 2025 Equitable and Sustainable Future Speaker Series. I'm very, very grateful to the Committee on Equality and Access to the Courts for organizing this event, and all of our partners or all of their partners, as well as the many people who worked very, very hard individually to make this happen. Judge Rebecca Copeland, who's the co-chair of the committee, William Bagasol, who you just heard from, Brianna Govea, who's working hard around the room here today, Catherine Piazza, Miyoko Pettit-Toledo, and Carrie Ann Shirota, among others. And also our partners at the Hawaii State Bar Association, the Civics Education Committee, in particular, Ryan Hamaguchi, Ruth O, and Liam Skilling. So we've worked long and hard with them and partners in trying to further civic education in our community, and particularly collaborating on events around the Constitution and Civil Liberties Day. And it was really unfortunate we had the torrential rains that day that forced us to have to postpone this event. I also want to thank all of our panelists for being here tonight. Deeply appreciate. I'm very proud to have Dr. Aaron Harbinson from the Hawaii Criminal Justice Research Institute, Wookie Kim from the ACLU, Dr. Jamie Miller from Eikola Meanui, Makalika Naholova'a from the Native Hawaiian Legal Corp, and our moderator from the William S. Richardson School of Law, Lori Ann DeMatos. And again, really grateful to all of them. Can you please join me in acknowledging them? And I want to acknowledge our partners at the legislature, some of whom I believe are on remotely tonight, including Senator Carl Rhodes and Representative David Tarnas, who's represented by Sean Aronson. As Judge Bagasol mentioned, there's a lot of history behind tonight's event, and that really comes back to 2021 with the murder of George Floyd and the death of others that same time period, and sort of thought that we as a community needed to come together to begin addressing and talking about those issues. And I was so grateful then for the SEAC committee pulling together that series. As you heard, we had hundreds and hundreds of people tune into those events. And this program, to me, is a continuation of the energy that was formed back then, of some of the ideas that were fronted back then to see where are we, what else do we need to do, and how can we work together to improve our justice system. So that's, I think, the overarching topic. How can we do better? And I think that is really why I'm interested in hearing from our speakers tonight and hearing in the future events. We've done a lot of work at the judiciary since I became Chief Justice, so I guess almost 15 years ago. A lot of what we've done has been partnerships with prosecutors and public defenders on what we call treatment courts. So that's a targeted way of trying to address specific needs of folks in the criminal justice system, most of whom or many of whom are struggling with addiction or other issues in their lives, and trying to find a way to give them a path forward. One of the best examples of that is what we call Women's Court, which was a subject of a recent really good article in Civil Beat. Matt Levi is going to do a special on that on television next month. Mohala Wahine, or Blossoming Women, it's really an amazing program. It's trauma-informed, team-based approach to try to give women in the criminal justice system, who we know are there for reasons different from men, almost always they've experienced trauma earlier in their life, try to address that trauma and figure out how we can best give them a path forward. I want to thank Judge Trish Morikawa for her leadership. She's done an amazing job. And it's a 3-year pilot program. The 3 years is up this summer. So we're asking the legislature and appreciate the support of all those listening tonight or here tonight to extend that program and make it permanent. We've also done a lot of work around the juvenile justice system, and obviously pathways into that system begin at a very early age. And what we know is that kids who are held in custody are increasingly at risk for further trauma down the line. And that's something that we've needed to address. And so beginning in 2009, we began a concerted effort to try to find alternatives to detention in our juvenile justice system. And that is an area where we've made significant progress, and critically without impacting public safety. And I want to emphasize that. We've been able to find other ways to meet the needs of protecting the public, but also being able to steer these young people in a better direction. And since 2009, the commitments of juveniles to the Hawaii Youth Correctional Facility have been reduced by 86%, which is a really very, very significant change. There's a lot of work left to be done, but that's something that I think reflects a lot of effort over a long period of time by a lot of people. We're trying to build on that progress in our First Circuit Family Court. Judge Jesse Hall has launched the Ho'okanaka Cultural Diversion Pilot Program using Hawaiian cultural teachings, farming, and counseling to meet the needs of youth who are, first-time, low-level violators, try to give them a chance to reconnect to the INA and be able to give them the opportunity to reflect on how their decisions affect their families and communities. So that's another amazing program. We're very, very proud of it, and that's just another way in which we've been able to partner with other folks in the community, in particular the Kupa Aina Farm, the Consuelo Foundation, Lili'o Kalani Trust, and the Native Hawaiian Legal Corp. We've done a lot of other work around criminal justice. We had a correctional justice task force that was chaired by my colleague Justice Mike Wilson, led to a lot of significant reforms. So one of the things I think is most significant is the creation of the Hawaii Correctional Oversight Commission. Kristen Johnson's the oversight coordinator. Mark Patterson's the chair. There's a 5-member board. It's really brought, in my mind, greater transparency to the operation of our prisons, and was a very important step forward. I really appreciate the work of the folks who are there, again, trying to bring light to an understanding of what the situation is in our prisons across the state. We had a pretrial reform task force chaired by Judge Trader. They came up with recommendations about how to find alternatives to bail, trying to get judges better information to make release decisions earlier in the process so they can make those decisions before people have been in jail for long periods of time. And one of the things that I really am proud of that came out of that effort was the creation of our Criminal Justice Research Institute, and that's Dr. Harbinson is our leader there. The idea is to be able to get data and analyze that data to figure out how we can keep our community safe more effectively, and also just to answer pressing issues about, is the system doing what we want it to do? Is it keeping us safe? Are we, who's in custody pretrial? When and how are they being released? So those are all very, very important questions. I'm really grateful we have Dr. Harbinson here tonight. Lastly, a major focus for us over about the last 4 or 5 years has been issues related to folks with mental illness who find themselves in the criminal justice system. There's a sense that we have folks, particularly nonviolent offenders, petty misdemeanors, who come into the system, who then are, because they presented as mentally ill, they're referred to the state hospital for treatment to make them basically able to meaningfully participate in the proceedings. They come back to court maybe months later. They plead no contest, or the charges are dismissed. They're released out to the street with no ongoing treatment, no ability to see to help them build towards a better future. So we've done a lot of work with the executive branch and the legislature to find better ways of ensuring and diverting those folks into treatment whenever possible. So we have a lot of work we've been doing, but most importantly, I want to hear about the work and the issues that the folks who are here tonight presenting are going to share with you. I thank you all for being here, and I'm really looking forward to tonight's event and wish you well throughout this and throughout the series to come. Aloha.
Mahalo, Chief Justice Rechtenwald. Next, I'd like to introduce Judge Rebecca Copeland, fellow co-chair and Circuit Court Judge of the First Circuit, to share a few more remarks regarding SEEK.
Okay, as Judge Bagazal indicated, thank you all for being here tonight on behalf of the Committee on Equality and Access to the Courts, especially since we had the weather and we had to reschedule on short notice. So I appreciate everyone who came out today and who's also appearing by Zoom. I'd also like to thank our co-sponsors again, and also Chief Justice Mark Rechtenwald for his steadfast support of the Committee on Equality and Access to Courts, for always being willing to consider new ideas and new ways to improve the administration of justice in Hawaii. In addition to the panel we have today, we do have a number of panels that we're going to be having over the next few months. The types of topics that will be covered include strategies for building a trauma-informed justice system in Hawaii, victim and survivor services, including related to restorative justice and domestic violence survivors, and ensuring public accommodations in our courts, including related to issues such as disability access, language access, immigration issues, which I know on everybody's minds right now, and LGBTQ status. The panelists, including some of the ones today during the series, will include members of the Hawaii Judiciary, the City and County of Honolulu Prosecutor, William S. Richardson School of Law, ACLU Hawaii, Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation, the Criminal Justice Research Institute, Hawaii Health and Harm Reduction Center, the Disability Rights Center, Legal Aid Society of Hawaii, the Hawaii State Coalition Against Domestic Violence, as well as many others. The overall goal of the series is not only to continue the collaborations that we started in 2021 as a result of our last series, but also to start new discussions and partnerships, and to provide a space for ideas and strategies to improve the administration of justice and to come up with sustainable strategies for the future. We believe that the topics that are going to be covered in the series are especially important now in light of everything that's going on in the rest of the country and on the national stage. It is vital that we reassess who we are, where we are, and what we believe the challenges and barriers are, and changes that should be made to ensure equitable access to justice. We hope the discussions that these panels spark will bring members of the community together in new and innovative ways toward our goals of shared work to the benefit of all of the members of our community. Because the topics in the series will cover are central to the judiciary's dedication to access to justice, we look forward to those discussions both with our panelists, their entities and organizations, as well as everyone who attends both in person and virtually at all of the panels to be part of those discussions. So again, thank you all very much for being here.
Mahalo, Judge Copeland. Finally, the time and the part that we've been all looking forward to tonight. I'd like to turn it over to Lorianne DeMatos, a law student at the William S. Richardson School of Law, to moderate the panel discussion. Thank you.
Aloha mai kako, and mahalo for joining us at Ali'iolani Hale, the home of the Hawaii Supreme Court, to kick off the Committee on Equality and Access to the Court's 2025 Equitable and Sustainable Future Speaker Series. My name is Lorianne DeMatos. I'm a 3L from Hilo. My interest is in transformative justice solutions, particularly grassroots solutions targeting pretrial detainees and the East Hawaii community. And last summer, I worked with Kamaile Maldonado on a criminal justice chapter of the second edition of Native Hawaiian Law, a treatise. Before I turn it over to our panelists, I would like to thank Chief Justice Mark Rechtenwald and the Hawaii State Judiciary for providing space for these conversations. Mahalo to our virtual audience joining us via Zoom, and to everyone who gathered here with us today in person. For some quick housekeeping, there are bathrooms just outside the Supreme Court courtroom in front of the elevator, as well as on the ground floor under the stairwells. And friendly reminder that this program is being recorded and will be posted on the Judiciary History Center's YouTube channel. So I'd like to ask that our panelists speak clearly and closely into the microphones to ensure the best audio quality, which I haven't been doing. I apologize. If we have time at the end of our discussion, I'll be taking questions from the audience. For those of you on Zoom, please feel free to send a question at any time. And finally, at the end of our program, we would like to invite you all to stay for a brief reception downstairs and enjoy some light food and refreshments. Okay, without further ado, speaking about the challenges and opportunities facing our justice system are our honorable and distinguished panelists. Starting first to my left, Dr. Jamie Mahealani Miller, co-founder and president of Ekolumea Nui. Wookie Kim, the legal director at the American Civil Liberties Union of Hawaii. Makalika Naholova'a, executive director of the Native Hawaiian Legal Corporation. And finally, Dr. Erin Harbinson, director of the Judiciary's Criminal Justice Research Institute. Thank you guys all for being here today. Okay, so starting with some general questions, I was wondering if you guys could speak about in what ways systemic disparities relating to race, gender, age, or disability, for example, appear in Hawaii's justice system, and what factors are kind of underlying those disparities.
I have to go first. Did you want to? Okay.
You can do the honors.
We're all deferring to each other here. Sorry, I'm getting used to the speaker here. In terms of systemic disparities, one of the things that we can look to in the state is we do have data from different agencies, and it's typically reported through population reports and kind of snapshots of information, whether it's the Department of Corrections, and you want to understand the demographic or gender or other makeup of the populations. You can go to these different agencies and look at their annual reports. So that's one way to study and look at this, and I guess I just dove right into the data and research. I'm with the Research Institute. That's what I tend to do, is go straight there. But, you know, with that being said, I think one of the challenges that we have in terms of understanding disparities in the state and evaluating them or improving them or studying them is that we don't really have a aggregate or consolidated kind of source of this information. And so, if you want to look at disparities in the jail, for example, you can kind of compile the population reports over time and get a sense of that, maybe how it's changed. But we're limited in understanding maybe why those disparities exist because we don't have some of the other information connected to that. So kind of with that framework in mind, I mean, I think that when you just look at the snapshots, you do see differences around race and representation. You do see less women relative to men. You can see those profiles there, but in terms of trying to understand what the underlying factors are, and really trying to understand local solutions, I think that's where we can really improve how we collect this data, and not to just put a plug in for our work, but with the Criminal Justice Research Institute being established, I think it was really important out of pretrial reform because it was a way to bring siloed data together to look at policy questions. But within that, we can look at disparities and how different policies not just produce outcomes around public safety or court appearance or other effects that we're looking for, but also how we can improve and reduce disparities where they exist as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So does anyone on the panel, or would you like to share, what do you folks think are the key factors that are contributing to over-incarceration in Hawaii and these similar problems to what Dr. Harbinson was mentioning? And then how do those issues, how are they similar and how are they different from what we see nationally?
I can start on this one. I mean, I think one key factor is a tough on crime mentality that pervades the community, and thinking that locking people up is going to solve our social problems. And what that means is you've got every year, and right now we're in the middle of session, you've got people saying that in order to address a given problem, whatever it may be, we need to add to the penal code so that it's easier to lock people up. And I think I was very pleased to hear the Chief Justice talk about diversion, because I think I'm skipping ahead a little bit, but if we're thinking about how we move forward and how we decarcerate and how we avoid funneling people into this really horrific system, carceral system, we have to think about diversion, making sure that people avoid entering the system in the first place. And so any of those initiatives are super important. As far as other factors, I mean, right, there's some data on that exists about kind of how punitive our existing carceral system actually is right now. Just as some examples, Hawaii, unfortunately, has the distinction of being the #1 as far as the average probation duration in the nation. So average of 59 months that people are on probation, right? And so these are just little snippets, right? And I think, as Dr. Harbinson notes, it's really important that we look at the data, see these trends, and notice that, we have all these disparities. And just adding on, right, OHA did a report a few years ago that documented the overrepresentation of Native Hawaiians in the system. The ACLU of Hawaii, we did a report on bail, and no surprise, people who are poor are very much overrepresented in the pretrial population. And these are serious problems because, of course, a system that isn't equitable is arguably not legitimate in the sense of, right, reflecting the foundational principles of equal protection. So those are some, in my view, some of the key factors.
I can add something else onto that. our current state here in Hawaii and how we send people to private prisons. There's some kind of incentive around that. It's contractual. We need to continue to fill those prison spaces up. So something around private prisons and the relationship that we have with them here in Hawaii. Um, how do we get out of that? I mean, how do we start bringing our people home, and even juveniles? And I don't think we send women away anymore, but juveniles and men are out of state in private facilities, but how do we bring them home? And then we got to ask ourselves, the current rehab programming that we do have is it's not adequate enough for people that are reentering back into the community. So then recidivism, those rates don't change. So I think those are some of the other factors beside what Wookie shared.
Yeah, so going straight off of that, I guess as important context, since 1995, over 1,000 men have been transferred to serve time out of state, and they're primarily housed at Core Civic Saguaro Prison in Arizona, which is a private facility. So would you guys like to speak, or Dr. Miller, would you like to speak to the effect that that has on our community, that we're sending people out of state, and what effect it has maybe on those individuals or their families?
So let me just start by saying that so I'm the co-founder, co-executive director of a Kolumea Nui nonprofit organization. Our mission is to transform the criminal legal system so that it has more Native Hawaiian practices and values within the system. And the nonprofit was formed as a reaction to our lived experience. My son was incarcerated for 9.5 years. First person in our family to ever be involved in the criminal legal system. And we did not know how to be supportive as a ohana. And so halfway through his incarceration, we started the nonprofit organization, hearing from other families, and saw that how can we turn something negative or traumatizing to our whole family, and how can we use this experience to help heal us, but also heal others and community. And so most of the time my son was in Arizona, in Saguaro. He started his sentence at 21 years old, and 6 months he was at Halava, and then he got moved to Saguaro. And for us, a Native Hawaiian family, being in close proximity to our Aina, where you are, where you're born, where his piko is, breathing the same air, tasting the same water, waking up to the same sun, going to sleep to the same moon is very important. And when he got moved away to Arizona, that 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 disconnection was beyond physical for us and our family. He was already away in Halava. We're in Punalu'u. But we knew we were around in the same elements, and that kind of kept our family together. So anyways, when he went to Arizona, we wanted to continue that physical connection, but it became burdensome because it's expensive, right? We got to fly there, we got to take off of work, we got to find hotel, and then we hope that visits don't get canceled, and all of that. And it's just exhausting and taxing. But we did that because of that ohana connection that I mentioned. And so we made sure, and we were a family that had the resources to do it, even though it was burdensome. But along the way, we were meeting other families that were making loans to go and do this. We're borrowing from somebody and borrowing from somebody else to go and visit their loved ones. So besides the disconnection of family, that it compounds on top of that. The expense of phone calls, the expense of trying to do visits so you remain connected, all of that disrupts the family and of course the community that you come from. But I will say that if you were to ask, because we asked people that were there, and even now in this, we do some surveys. The men would rather go away and be in Saguaro than actually do time here. When my son was there, he did say that the gang activity here in Halava was life-threatening, and he didn't belong to any gangs, and he was always pressured to join a gang, and he didn't want to. When he went to to Arizona, it was more like the Hawaii men were in and of itself. They made their own community, and it was somewhat safer. There wasn't that gang rival because at the time, the facility only housed Hawaii. I think it's changed now. They have other states that also go into Saguaro, so there's mixed population. But so if you ask them, it's a newer facility. They didn't feel that the pressure of gangs. They had more programs. They did cultural programs there. They had faith-based programs. So the programming and the attention that they were given, he said, was very different than when it was here in Halawa. But how do we replicate that here in Hawaii so that families can stay together and become, you are the only thing that when a family is the only thing that when somebody comes out, that is that person's community. So how do we strengthen families and the resources so that our people do not have to recidivate or feel that that is where they belong and not want to get the treatment or the programs that are necessary to heal from the trauma or the compounded trauma, really, when you're in prison. And so that's my long answer, sorry.
No, thank you so much. And thank you for sharing your personal experience with all of us. It was really touching and moving. Okay, so kind of going off of a question that Dr. Miller posed just now, what solutions are we looking at in terms of how are we going to get out of these contracts and bring people home? But at the same time, how are we going to be sensitive to these feelings that many people have that they would prefer to go away? Are there any solutions that the state is looking at in terms of an exit strategy, I guess, that's also sensitive to these concerns?
What I'm aware of is there's a lot of work and advocacy being done on both sides to increase the number of beds we have in Hawaii for local jails, right? So, I mean, that would be one solution if your focus was on not having enough space in local jails and prisons so that you didn't have to send people away. I think the whole concept of over-incarceration and what is the solution to the problem of all the families that are being harmed by incarceration requires you to step back, zoom out, right? And I think one of the things that often happens, and there's a couple of lawyers, maybe, are you a lawyer? No, so me and Mookie are the lawyers. We're gonna hold it down on the lawyering. Lawyers, what the legal profession does really well in this conversation is it spent a lot of time thinking through what is the philosophy underlying this system and how do we articulate the goals of it. And I think you actually have to zoom out that far. Starting, I think, at the tactical level is a little bit of a trap because even the concept of over-incarceration is going to depend upon the worldview and the culture and the beliefs that you hold about what a healthy society looks like. You know, one of the things that I think a lot of people just assume as a given is that jail is as a function for retribution to society. This is a concept in the law that underpins the criminal justice system in the United States, and it was imported from England as, you know, our predecessor political system. So what retribution means is that when people do something that breaks our social code, which is, it's more than the law, but the law is a big part of it, that they actually owe something to our society at large, that you have violated a trust that we've created in our society, and that trust is really important for our society to work. And so not only have you harmed, you know, whoever was the direct person that was injured by whatever it is you did, you robbed them, you assaulted them, right? There's a harm to that person specifically, but that violation of the code has hurt us collectively. And that there's a sense that in order to keep the trust and get everybody to mostly follow these rules, you need to pay. And so going to jail is about retribution. It's about paying a debt you have to society. Actually, the person who was actually harmed by you doesn't get anything from that, right? Not in terms of actually making them whole. Like, you going to jail doesn't fix their car. You going to jail doesn't, pay their medical bills. So all that your jail time and your fees are doing is paying back the state for that sort of collective harm you've caused society. And then anything that's going to happen later to actually take care of the people who directly suffered whatever it is you did, I mean, you can go pursue civil remedies, there's just different stuff you can do, but the reality is most of them, nothing happens for them. They just have to figure it out. So I think one of the things that makes Hawaii really unique, distinctive, maybe not unique, because I think this conversation could be had in a lot of different places, but what makes Hawaii really distinctive is that you've got a host culture predating 1959 or 1893, depending on how you think about it, that had a restorative justice system, which didn't look at jailing people as a necessary way to pay back some debt you had to society, right? This whole retributive principle that comes from Europe. It was imported into the United States with who became European Americans, and it came here by similar methods. So one of the things that Hawaii could be thinking about is, can we get aligned on having a restorative justice policy goal, right? Like, if you're going to continue to have a retributive policy goal, you're going to have a hard time minimizing over-incarceration. Like, one of the best things you could do to reduce incarceration is start from a worldview that jail is not something you need to do to pay back society. That what we really need to be doing is thinking about the fact that people actually, and if you look at Eastern philosophy, you don't only have to look at Native Hawaiian philosophy, although I'm obviously an advocate for that, but you can look at Eastern society, you can look at Confucianism. Like, there's a lot of philosophers around the world who actually say really well-run societies just come from people's shared desire to be a part of a place where their family is safe, and people actually self-regulate way more than they do by the law. So when they're breaking the law, there is actually something wrong with the system. People want to live in communities where they are safe and where their families are safe. And so when they are breaking that trust, there is a reason. And we need to reflect on that. So, sorry, I don't want to monologue too long and take all the space from people, but I think because this panel is meant to help people kind of across the state make this concept more real for them, we can get into the tactics of things that are happening, specifically in departments and agencies and in prison systems. But a thing that I really hope people in Hawaii think about is, because you can control this yourself, like what you think yourself, no matter what role you hold as a member of our society, is really important. And if you can start thinking about restoration, think about when people are committing crimes, something is wrong. Something is wrong, something is happening. People don't just commit crime. Like, it's a very rare person who is just sincerely deranged committing crimes because they just sociopathically think that that is a fun thing to do. And the data, this has been studied plenty. Dr. Aaron can probably talk about this. The CJ mentioned it. In women, there's almost always a history of trauma. I would actually venture that for women and men, it's a history of trauma, but it's probably less sexual violence and more different kinds of trauma. But I think when we say trauma for women, we're talking specifically about domestic violence and sexual violence. I think if you look at the data for men, domestic violence is probably actually right up in there the same way as women, but it's not reported as such, because when dad hits son, it's not called domestic violence, but it is domestic violence, right? So the trauma is actually true across the gender gap. And so thinking about when people are breaking that trust we have in our society, they are hurting. There is something going on, and what they need is healing. And if we can infuse that goal of healing, but that will get us towards less incarceration and less recidivism. At the same time, it is going to require us to reconcile ourselves with this retributive justice belief that we imported from England and from the continent. And we just have to have that conversation first.
Thank you so much. Okay, so kind of talking about pretrial reforms, thinking about how we're rethinking our own lens and how we're viewing the world, there's kind of these two separate issues. There are people who have been convicted and who are serving time, but there are people who have not yet been convicted and who are incarcerated awaiting trial. So what are we kind of looking at or thinking about, either practically or on a level of how we're changing our thinking and our goals, about having a system where defendants can remain safely in the community before they go to trial?
I can take this one. I mean, the ACLU of Hawaii has been pretty focused on pretrial reform, bail reform for a number of years, and this is one of, in our view, this is one of the key tools to addressing over-incarceration, right? Because the problem with our current system of pretrial detention is that, let me step back. What is the purpose of pretrial detention? It's to ensure that people are showing up for court appearances, and it's also to ensure public safety. But the way our system is actually playing out today is that it is intended to punish. And that shouldn't be the case, because pretrial detainees are not yet convicted of anything, yet they're treated just the same under our system as people who have been convicted. And so, just building off of Makalika's point, it reflects a retributive eye for an eye, whatever you want to call it, principle that's, in my view, dangerous and harmful and counterproductive and not what we should be striving towards. So as far as what's on the horizon, I mean, obviously the legislature has looked at these issues, the judiciary has looked at these issues, and there have been lots of changes over the years. I think that the data, though, doesn't really reflect that we're having a true cultural shift in how the system works, because in 2019, the legislature passed Act 179 that was intended to implement a lot of these really noteworthy recommendations that came out of the pretrial reform task force report. They're purportedly implemented, but when you look at the actual data, or at least the data that exists, and I know Dr. Harbinson is doing more to analyze the data, but we at the ACLU had analyzed the existing data that existed from the Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, and in short, before these reforms were implemented in 2019, and comparing that to today, the number of pretrial detainees is essentially the same. And if anything, pretrial detainees constitute a larger share of the overall carceral population. So even though the number of total people in the carceral system is sort of, staying constant, I'm sorry, I think it's actually I'm messing up my math here, but the point is that pretrial detainees are constituting a larger and larger share of our carceral system, and that should be very concerning to all of us, because all it takes for someone to be put into a jail cell is, right, the government, the state saying, I think you've committed a crime. Whether or not there's any basis for that, whether or not there's any evidence, right? That's all it takes. I mean, of course, I'm oversimplifying. There are protections. Someone has to, there has to be a probable cause, etc. But just last week, we had another person die in jail. Eric Scotton, he was murdered in jail, right? And he, regardless of what he was accused of having done, he did not deserve to die, right? And that's the system that we have right now. And we need to find a way to change the culture around pretrial. Everyone is responsible. Judges are responsible for taking seriously their obligations under the law to consider, thinking about the appropriate bail amount or whether to even impose money bail at all. Public defenders, right, need to advocate, file motions, make good arguments. Prosecutors need to stop opposing the release of people who are innocent until proven guilty into the community before they appear at trial. And then all of us, meaning community, right? We need to be telling our legislators that instead of making loitering at a bus stop a crime, we need to be taking down these punitive laws that we've been adding, right? And, it's hard. As a legislator, you need to be accountable to the community. And it's hard to scale back. Once you've scaled up, you can't scale back. And that's a big problem in our system. So I'll stop there. I could go on forever on this.
Thank you so much. I wanted to tag in Dr. Harbinson if you have anything to add regarding what we've been bringing up about data and pretrial detention and those kinds of things.
Yeah, so I actually had a couple of thoughts here that relate to the prior question and this question too. Even though I don't have a law degree, criminologists love to talk about the philosophy of punishment too. So when you started going there, I was like, yes, let's go there. But one of the things too, I mean, we've talked a little bit about retributive functions, and there's definitely, I think an important point there is what is the purpose of punishment and the retributive part of that. But I also think another part of it is the deterrent function. And I think that's where a lot of the policy changes get complicated, is if you kind of talk to someone, the average person, we think longer prison sentences will deter people. We think, sentence length has some sort of magical relationship of so many months equals a stronger deterrent point. When in fact, the studies, not a lot of these, but the studies that we do have, we don't really find a relationship that a certain length of time has additional impacts. And so I think one thing when we talk about whether, if you're focused more specifically on the length of a prison term, how long that is, maybe deterrence is the punishment of prison itself, and the length of time is there for rehabilitative goals or for other goals. And so I think, whether, when you're talking about reducing incarceration, there is things you can do on the front end to reduce incarceration, but it's also the back end levers too. How long are people serving in paroling systems? When you have a prison system that has a paroling authority, you have the ability to shape their decisions to also affect length of stay and make impacts. And I bring up the length of stay thing or the time served aspect because one of the challenges when we look at crowding in jails or prisons, you can look at admissions and you can look at releases, and those sometimes can help explain why the capacity grows or why you see what you see. But often length of stay is a huge driver of what you see in population growth. And so that also, I think, kind of relates to with the pretrial. I think, why one of the projects we have, our main priority has been really to improve data capacity to answer these questions, because right now the information we have is looking at the pretrial population report or the jail population reports and seeing who's there pretrial. And so it gives us a sense of what proportion of people are there awaiting trial, but understanding why they're there is, we might expect some of it is because they're not being released, but there might be people released who are returning. And so we want to have the data to really understand, how do we impact that and make sure that the people, again, the goal of pretrial is to ensure people show up for court and protect public safety. And so how do we ensure that there are people released and it's done in a safe way? And, as we talk about pretrial, I mean, I probably could go on forever too about this, of course, but I think one thing that's also helpful to talk about is, not just thinking about how to release people more, but what do we release them to? What are those options? How do we release people into the community so that we do maintain public safety, we ensure they show up to court? And I think that's really one of the hardest challenges is we say, let's place people in the community, but how do we get the resources there, whether it's housing resources, treatment resources, How do we ensure that pretrial supervision is done in a way that really supports the people that need it? But also, there's also a thing as over supervising people. So we don't want to put some people under pretrial supervision who would do well under ROR. So I think that gets really challenging too in this discussion, and just wanted to kind of add some thoughts there on that too.
I really appreciate that kind of what you're saying with the deterrence too. Like, I think when you think about the philosophies of punishment, right? Even there, that it's punishment, right? Even that's the word, that it's punishment. Like, what is that's retributive, right? So, but if you look at retribution and you think to yourself, that's not a worldview that I have, right? For any, because like I said, it's not just Hawaiians who, from a cultural perspective, don't hold that view. Like it is a very deeply held view. It's with a long precedent in England. But if you don't come from England, I would just reflect on that. Like, is that the ways of your people? And then, so one, I think there's a lot of people in Hawaii who come from systems where actually that's not true. So you could think, so that's coming off, right? Then deterrence. Well, the data is pretty clear. It doesn't deter. So done. Like, that's not the thing. So then what's the reason for it? Okay, well, if what you have left is restorative, then just go harder on that. And then analyze everything that you do through the lens of, does this achieve my underlying goal of restoration? Right? But I think like people aren't being encouraged to think that way. I guess I would also say that in the vein of restoration for the person, but for the whole community, right? That by like healing them, getting them back into being healthy contributors to the society, that you benefit. But it does require a level of introspection and enlightenment, right? Because if you allow people to manipulate the way that you feel and think with fear, like, and that is known to be a tool that works really well for riling people up at scale, is to make them afraid. So I think it does, one of the things that makes Hawaii a really distinctive place to have this kind of enlightened conversation is that we are small. We are small. Like, that's something that I think Hawaii has actually always been really proud of, is that it's a smaller place compared to, you know, big states that are often our counterparts in our comparatives. And what that means is that people actually know each other. And so our ability to look past fear mongering into being like, no, like, we're 3 degrees of separation at most always. You know, if we haven't been family in the past, the chances of us being family in the next 2 generations are actually, like, nobody would say you and I will not be related some way in 2 generations, right? Nobody's gonna make that bet. It's not possible in Hawaii. That's a bad bet. Like, there's a really good, you would not bet your life on that, right? Because we're small and our families are interconnected, and they have been for a long time, and they will continue to be into the future. And so being able to look at it and say, hey, what I think makes this hard for a lot of states, like where you have homogeneity, you actually see some of the most progressive, you know, aspire to criminal justice systems in the world are areas that basically are not diverse. And so you might ask yourself, like, why is that? At least not ethnically diverse, right? The less ethnically diverse they are, why is that? It's not because they're genetically more law abiding. It's because people that don't have that ethnic diversity, they're finding that they don't allow their ethnicity to divide them. And so they come together without the challenge of difference, to come together and develop a code that they can all agree to. And then they actually care about the people who have to go through that system in a way that reflects a sense of community, a sense of, you are not other, you are not trash, you are a part of the community that I'm a part of. And that is really hard in the American experience. But a state that has one of the better chances of achieving that notion and approaching criminal justice accordingly is Hawaii.
Thank you so much. So speaking about that kind of feeling of maybe feeling like this could happen to anyone, or feeling that sense of like being a part of this social code and being a part of a community with each other, what role, this is mostly for Dr. Miller, but anybody else can chime in, what role do you think that incarcerated people and their families should have in creating these reforms, and what can you contribute?
So I'll give you an example of something that we're working on at a Kolumea Nui. So maybe 2 years ago, well, actually it was the middle of COVID, And I have 6 grandchildren. The eldest one was 11 at that time. And we were watching the news, and she saw on the news that care homes and prisons and jails were the hot spots for COVID. And she had just learned, she was 2 years old or 3 years old when her uncle went into prison. She thought he went away to college. We never said in the family, like, oh, he's going to prison. He just went away. And it was the same time that his peers were in college. So she just assumed that he was in college. And then she had just learned during COVID that it wasn't college because everybody had come home already. And anyways, she learned that he was in prison. So it alarmed her at 11 years old that her uncle could get COVID and others in the facilities, and nobody was really caring about that because at that time it was scary, right? We didn't know much what was happening, much about COVID, and people were scared for their lives. And so it was on the peripheral, the prisons and the care homes. And so she, at 11 years old, she started to this sense of advocacy started to kind of build up in her. She's 16 now, and 11, between then and now, she's been doing a little advocacy things, working closely with Carrie Ann. I would say Carrie Ann Shirota is kind of like one of her mentors. And this year, the last 6 months, she got together with some of her peers. These were her best friends, all Native Hawaiian girls. They all go to Kamehameha schools. And I had no idea that they were all justice impacted. Either their father or their mother is currently incarcerated or was incarcerated. And they kind of just formed this little hui. And now they're part of Ekolomea Nui. We call them Na'opio Vaivai, or now. They have their own mission statement. They have their own vision. They write their own grants. And they are advocates now for HB 129, which is their goal is to eliminate youth prisons in the world, and find alternative programmings for that. So they're connecting internationally, and so they are stewarding this bill, and it just got approved in the first reading and it's ready to cross over, and it's to do away with youth fees and fines for youth. And this is not the first time that it has been before the ledge, and it has not the first time it's been part of your folks' ledge package. But we are hearing that this is the first time that it's gotten this far and gotten this much momentum, and mainly because of the voices of those that it affects. And so that's a strategy that many of us should really take a look at, and be welcoming of the lived experience of people to help and reform and be a part of reform. And that is what our organization does. And the partnering, we work with other partnering organizations that have justice impacted or justice involved leadership, and looking at what reform looks like and what kind of programs. So that's just one example of success, and that next generation, and really giving them the voice, because they're going to be the future in just a bit, and they don't want youth prisons while they become adults, right? So
So, going off of what we've kind of been talking about, how you mentioned these Native Hawaiian youth who are impacted by the justice system, as well as what Makalika was talking about with how we are on Native Hawaiian land and there was a system that existed before this that was more restorative. How can we integrate those ideas, these cultural practices, both from people who are most impacted, and how does diversity in the legal system help to contribute to that?
I would say, so currently right now, I go into Waiava and women's facilities twice a week, and we are implementing a pilot program where we provide ho'oponopono training, or at least knowledge, to a cohort. And after several months, they get a certificate of, that they have learned about ho'oponopono. But what ends up happening, and what we are seeing, we're in our second cohort at both facilities right now, is that they get to reflect. And you don't have to be Native Hawaiian, by the way, it's open to anyone in the facility. But they get to reflect on how this cultural practice can start to transform who they are while they're still incarcerated. And then we on the outside work with the families on the outside and offer the ho'oponopono services, and try and bring them together so that, like I said earlier, like your family is your support system when you re-enter. And and as much as you have been traumatized as the incarcerated person, so has the ohana. And so how do we get them to a place where they can be supportive of one another so that they can be, you know, strong in this healing time? So my son was incarcerated for 9.5 years. He's been out for 4 years. He's doing really, really well, very good, but he has a ton of support. But I will say he's not healed, and we're not healed. What we did learn in looking back when he came out, like all we wanted was for him to come out. We just wanted him to come out, and we were like, and then everything will be okay. And that is not the truth. He's been out 4 years, and there's still a lot of trauma that we all have to heal from. And what we do understand is that that time that he was in there, development and growth as a person stopped, and the trauma just compounded. So when he comes out, he needs to relearn things and take care of himself, but also heal from the compounding of trauma that had occurred. And that's going to take more than 9.5 years. And so this Ho'oponopono project that we are piloting right now, that is to give families as the first direct interaction with people that are re-entering back into community and ohana, so that they can sustain throughout the however many years that is necessary for healing. And as Makalika had said earlier, like that was part of our system prior to colonialism. As far as healing, there was always a healer in every home, in every community. You knew where to go to. There was pu'ohonuas that we could go to, so that you had your time out, or that was your time to spiritually reflect. We had the ho'oponopono practice where you could face the person that you hurt, and there was some kind of cultural retribution and healing that was occurring. And so we definitely need more of those programs. Just before COVID, a bunch of Ho'oponopono practitioners were having a meeting. And we had decided that we needed to find a court that we could, and it was part of the recommendations from the task force, that to have some sort of cultural court, a diversion sort of program for maybe misdemeanors, and they would divert into doing Ho'oponopono. And we were just on the cusp of piloting that on Maui, and COVID hit. And then you folks know what happened to the court system. And so now we are starting to talk about that, because there's practitioners that are ready and willing and able to have that sort of cultural court come back. Or at least it never did happen, but to start one, have an inaugural one. So, and maybe you can speak to some of that. I don't know. Can you repeat it?
Yeah, so what we've been talking about, where Native Hawaiians are most affected by the justice system, as well as how Native Hawaiians are also most affected by colonialism and this having the justice system imposed on them. What is the best way to integrate these Native Hawaiian cultural practices into the justice system, or take people out of the justice system and put them into these programs?
I definitely think you got to stop doing private prisons. I feel that way for actually everybody, not just Hawaiians, but certainly it's impacting Hawaiians in a really acute, harmful way. building on what Jamie said, Native Hawaiian worldview, if people don't know, your health and wellness is inextricably intertwined with connection, pilina, like your relationships define your health. So if you are cut off from your relationships from family, lahui and aina, which is where our iwi kopuna rests, and with which we have a familial relationship, when you disconnect from that, it is impossible for you to be healthy. It is impossible for you to be well. That is the Hawaiian worldview and culture. So when you take people out of state, which like out of state sounds so innocuous for people from the continent because that doesn't sound like such a big deal. But we know in Hawaii what that means is you're taking, thousands of miles away. Like the practical impact of that is all the things Jamie said. So I think we shouldn't be sending people out of state. I think we should not be doing private prisons because no American should want there to be an industrial interest in incarceration. That is a very bad idea because that is creating a system where now imprisoning people is how you create jobs, and don't we need jobs? And it's creating profit for people. And we know that industry, the more profitable something is, the more influence is going to be exerted to increase it, right? Grow it as an industry. And imprisoning people should not be an industry. So that's two things for sure. I mean, on the cultural court piece, I guess I will make just another pitch for Ho'oponopono. I'm Haumana of Ho'oponopono, and I was really privileged to be a part of a group of people from the Native Hawaiian Bar Association who about, I think it might have been 5 years ago now, were selected to study it with, Master Ho'oponopono practitioner Lynette Peglinawan. And her goal was to empower some lawyers with a deep understanding of Ho'oponopono so that we could help to further the conversation about how you integrate this and make Hawaii's courts more restorative and the judicial system more restorative. And one of the things that I think people might not appreciate about it is it's incredibly efficient compared to what we do now. Efficient in the sense of how much it gets done in one motion and how much cheaper it is, right? So if people haven't looked at this, we haven't talked about it yet, maybe Aaron can talk about this. It's very expensive to incarcerate people. Again, in part because that's what industry wants. Once you bring industry into it, right, like that's where they make their money, and you've created a system where it's going to get more expensive so that people can profit, right? But even if you weren't putting them in private prisons, it's just expensive, super expensive. And you still don't get, the person who was actually harmed by the crime doesn't get anything. That's not what they get. You going to jail does not fix their car. It doesn't repair their house. It doesn't pay their medical bills. The Ho'oponopono system actually helps people to get pono, and you have to get pono in yourself, so it does a lot of the work I think that Jamie was talking about in terms of getting the person ready to be a healed person in society, contributing in a healed, healthy way. But it also involves, you cannot get to that pono without working with the person who was immediately harmed by what you did, including your family, by the way, because your family is also harmed when you do things that are not pono. So there's just something about it that I think I wish more people understood what it was, because implementing it in our justice system, it's so efficient and it gets more done. Whereas in the Western system that we have now, you have a fork in the road, and there's criminal, which is about this retributive thing. And then you might never get to actually fixing how you hurt the people that actually suffered your crime. And Ho'oponopono does that. So there's some functional benefits to our traditional ways of doing things that are a real miss. And there's definitely room to implement it more in our justice system.
Dr. Harbinson, I don't know if you wanted to speak to the cost of incarceration or if that's something that you folks study.
Well, I don't have that off the top of my head or handy for right now, but it's
No,
definitely considering.
No, I apologize for putting you on the spot. Okay, so we've been talking about also things like we have these great organizations in Hawaii like Ekolomeanui who are doing this incredible grassroots work. But on the level of like the legislature and the judiciary, I don't know, Wookie, if you could speak to this, the recent legislative changes that are trying to address these inequities, as well as what we should look forward to.
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm going back to one of my earlier points, which, well, maybe I didn't actually say this, but we can change all the laws that we want, but if we as a culture and as a community don't adopt or change our worldview and outlook, that's not going to change anything in the system, right? And I think my mentioning Act 179 as an example, that we all, meaning the community, thought this law is going to help make our carceral system more fair. We're going to have fewer people in pretrial detention. And 5 years on, it's the same old, right? And so I don't know what the answer is to this question. I mean, I guess it's, I think it's really important that, right, we are hearing from those who are impacted in those processes, and that when big decisions are being made about what the laws are and what our rules are for living together, that we are learning these lessons from people who have been impacted. And I just don't think that's happening enough in our system, and we just need to find better ways to incorporate the lived experiences of people who've been impacted.
So this is both, you guys have addressed this idea of us changing our cultural mindsets and our personal mindsets to get away from this retributive carceral system. So beyond that, how can people stay engaged with these issues, and how can they follow along and look out for these reforms, or look out when their voices might be needed, like to testify before the legislature or anything like that?
I don't know if this is directly answering the question, but I think one way that we can change our own mindsets about things is what Brian Stevenson, a very prominent civil rights activist, talks about, which is getting proximate, getting close to whatever it may be, whatever issue we're talking about. And so I would encourage all of you to go spend a morning in district court and see what those bail hearings look like, right? And it will probably surprise you in a lot of different ways. I talked about the bill that's currently before the legislature, which is trying to criminalize being within 20 feet of a bus stop if you have no intention of using the bus. We all know who, or what the target group is by that law. And where does that come from? It comes from fear of the houseless community, right? Concern that someone is going to attack you. And so my recommendation is talk to people in your neighborhood or in your community who are houseless and hear their story. We at the ACLU, we go out to public spaces and we speak to houseless people and we hear their stories, and it really shapes you when you actually get close to an issue or close to a problem, even if you yourself have not maybe been impacted or experienced it in the same way. And it's only by getting proximate that we can being proximate to these issues will help all of us understand, be empathetic, not otherize, and recognize that we're all one community, and we should not be putting labels and dividing our single community. So it's not quite, I don't know if that was directly responsive, but.
Awesome. So if I could just get one final thought from each of you, basically, and we've gone over this, like where we see the justice system going, but if there's something that you could leave the audience with in terms of where we go from here.
I'm gonna just say something and tag on to what Wookie said about and even what Makalika had referred to around perceptions and maybe even worldview and mind shifts. That data is so important. We don't have a follow-up report to the OHA report of 2014, and I'm pretty sure that the numbers are the same, that there's still the disparities that are occurring. But that tells a story and it tells a narrative. And I think if we start to, as community and society, next steps would be, or where is this going, is that if we can grab onto a piece of data that tells the true story, like it's $90,000 plus a year to incarcerate one person, and the DOE spends less than $20,000 a year to educate a child, like those kinds of things, and we start to reshape the narratives and pull it more towards the truth. And so people aren't grabbing onto, oh, well, we can't change that law because the community is not going to be safe. These people cause harm, you know. But if we start to get to know who the population is and understand it's not us and them, it's us, and we grab onto the pieces of data to tell the story and the narrative, I think we'll start to see a shift in the general population that is going to be allies and champions with us as we are transforming the system. So that's my 2 cents.
My closing point is to get proximate, right? To really get close to these issues. Get close to the carceral system to the extent that you can, however it may be. Have those conversations with people who have been incarcerated before. Talk to someone who's houseless, who's cycled in and out of jail multiple times and is constantly being harassed by police. Whatever it may be, having that opportunity to get proximate to the issue is really the solution.
I guess I like all of this, so I'm just going to add something. I actually think I would encourage people to selfishly hold your system accountable for things that work. So if someone has been selling you the idea your whole life that what we have been doing works, and you're looking around and what you're seeing is more homelessness, more drug addiction, more violence, you could just blame the people that you're seeing who are expressing those behaviors, or you could look to the system and say, you have been lying to me and you are ineffective. And actually, I'm going to hold you accountable. And you need to come up with something else instead of just continuing to get me to hate people who are actually victims themselves. And so I think often, I sit in a role in an institution, right? I expect, and my community does a really good job of holding me accountable for being effective in achieving the mission that I have been trusted to execute against. And I guess I would just say, do that too. I see a lot of people, the state level, the national level, that there's a quickness to say, I'm gonna blame other people that are doing things I don't like, when it's really, we all live in a system and you are paying people to run that system. And I'm not seeing enough accountability to people who are playing the same playbooks, and the society's not getting better. And I think right now, like what we're seeing nationally, right, it's a very challenging time for us nationally. And I think, that is also being tested. It's like, did we allow ourselves to be told that certain people are the problem? And so we're trusting old playbooks that are being run at an extreme level. And now, the person who sold us that we're going to have a better society is like cutting off the nonprofits and, basically doing everything they can to actually increase incarceration when you think about it, because attacking all of these service organizations and all the do-gooders in the world is probably the fastest way that you can actually, one of the many things is increase incarceration, because you're going to have less services to help vulnerable people. And it's very clear from the data that vulnerable people, they turn to crime when they cannot figure out how to meet their needs, right? Like that is one of the things that they do, whether it's their mental health needs, whether it's their economic needs. Like, so I just would encourage people to selfishly hold lawmakers accountable, hold the system accountable, and like, I think that people are asked to spend a lot of energy on civic engagement. And even as a citizen, and even in the role that I hold, like, I feel sorry for all of us, because I feel like we're paying people to do those jobs and then we still have to do them ourselves, right? Like when I see everybody having to go to the ledge and like they dedicate their lives as citizens to like testify for 3 or 4 months a year, I'm like, did we not elect people who are supposed to know what we care about, know where we stand, and they need to do this? Like, why are we all having second jobs having to do this? And so, just for what it's worth, I mean, I think you should be civically engaged. That's how democracy works. But vote and hold people accountable with your vote, so that you're not having to like elect these people and then have a half-time job telling them how to do their job correctly. Like, I think that's wild that we have this system.
Um, So just thinking through kind of the discussion and the comments, a couple of things I thought about. I mean, obviously, I'm going to probably go back to data, but I think, one of the things, where it could be useful is, where like the example about bail. A lot of the community and the public thinks of bail as a punishment, or just hasn't really maybe spent much attention thinking about what it's there for and how it works and how it's part of a larger system, or maybe hasn't thought about, well, what if I were ever charged? How would I want to be treated if I'm innocent until proven guilty? And so I think with data and even kind of beyond that is how can we help educate people more in the community about the system so that when someone runs on a platform that's tough on crime or is saying that these increased punishments will have an effect, how can data help dispel some of that? How can we show, the outcomes, and going back to accountability. If we say that this law is going to make us safer, how can we use data to measure that? And so I'm, with everyone here on the panel, I think all this really ties together, but I think even there's the data piece, and part of our work is trying to wrangle that data so that we can respond more quickly to questions because they happen so rapid fire. So, you could spend 7-8 months trying to prepare data to answer a question, and by then the law has passed or there's a new question that has changed. So that's definitely some of the challenges, but I think working together to maybe help educate the community on some of these maybe myths that we have about how the system works, and data could be a part of that. But I also think bringing in other community members and voices, because the numbers help, but there's also people behind those numbers. And I know with research too, sometimes it's easy to get caught into what is this effect size? This is a big enough sample. What is the percentage? But we're talking about people. And so the example of going and actually observing and seeing what's happening, I think we do that in our work too, to remember that we're talking about people and people's lives are impacted, and we want to do a good job representing that. So I just kind of echoing basically everything else that has been said, just want to reinforce that too.
Thank you folks so much. So now I'm going to open up to audience questions. If any of you folks here in person have any questions, or if we have any questions via Zoom.
We do have questions via Zoom. Let's go back and forth.
Hi, thank you so much to all the panelists, Rachel Wong, especially for rescheduling and making this possible. I was late, so I missed the CJ's opening comments, and I don't know if he touched on this. When we talk about transforming a system, whether it's by being proximate, including lived experience, holding the system accountable using data, I was wondering if the conversation has also included the child welfare system, because it's part and parcel. And, I think some of us have been at Nakama Ahaloa events where Venus Rossetti Medeiros talks about all the different ways Native Hawaiian families have hanai'd children, and for different lengths of time and in different ways. So just like we're talking about restoration, there does exist. So my questions are, one, has this been included because it's the life cycle and it's families in so many different iterations? And also to highlight the Malama Ohana working group that has been looking at this, has included Live Voices data and child welfare services in this transformation. Thank you.
There's so much to say about foster care and child removal. But it's at this point, there's been enough data gathered nationally, and it's reflected in Hawaii data as well, that the foster care system is the pipeline into the criminal justice system. So, just again, I don't want to leave behind people who are not Native Hawaiian, because all communities are impacted by this system. It's just the community that I represent, I know the most about. So, we're doubly represented in the kids who were removed from their homes, right? So, and then you see that overrepresentation continue into jail. So we are consistent with the data that you see for people of color on the continent. On the continent, you're normally talking about this with regards to Black Americans and American Indians, right? So that's why there's a lot of focus on removal of children from their families. This country has a long and horrible history of intentionally breaking apart Native families. as a method to get them to assimilate and adapt to the majority culture, right? So on the continent, there's a lot of work that's been done to stop that because it actually has not ended. And so some people may have heard of something called the Indian Child Welfare Act, ICWA. ICWA is constantly under attack because there's such an interest on like take the, save the child, kill the Indian, right? Which Native Hawaiians are not Indians, but I think it's important for people, so far as this is a pretty acute Native Hawaiian problem, I think it is useful for people to understand that the colonization that Native Hawaiians have experienced was basically using a refined playbook that had already been run across the continent and across South America as well on the Native people there. So, Native Hawaiians don't meet their first white person until the late 1700s. By that time, you've already got a couple centuries of experience by Europeans oppressing and colonizing Native people in North and South America. And so in some ways, what is really tough, we got the benefit of observing and learning during the Kingdom era how to deploy some strategies that I think have been really beneficial for the health and wellness of our people. But at the other hand, the United States also had refined their playbook, right? They didn't get worse at that. They got better from practice. And so breaking apart our families is a long-standing trick, and it is still going on. It's very clear that that is what's feeding our overrepresentation into the criminal justice system. So if we could stop breaking apart Hawaiian families, there is reason to believe you would stop having Hawaiian children grow up and become Hawaiian adults in jail the way that they are.
I can share a little bit, Rachel. I know that I do some work with Venus and with Lori and some of the task force that you mentioned, and one of the things that we recognize is that if you're involved in this carceral system, so if you have a family member that's been incarcerated or in jail, the likelihood of, and you have a family, the likelihood of you being involved in other systems like CWS or even at the Department of Education, and maybe even within that system, your child is not doing well. So you're impacted by multi-systems, especially if you are incarcerated or your family's incarcerated. I think that one of the how do we address that? I think that is difficult and challenging because you don't want to out yourself or you don't want to be involved in CWS. So you're going to have the strain on your ohana to take care of all your son's children in one household, and not want to raise any red flags because you don't want to be connected there. So there's no safeguards at all, or there's no services at all that a family needs while someone is being incarcerated. And so then you get the removal, you get called by CWS, the school calls, reports you for whatever. And then all of a sudden you're entrenched in all of these systems. And so I mean, I don't have any answers or anything, but I definitely know for like, how do we work together in the work that we all do in this system, and how do we include the other systems as we're transforming one? Like, they all need transformation because there's the disparity and the disproportion in every single one of these systems that affect, for us here in Hawaii, Native Hawaiian families and other families, but I know most about Native Hawaiian families. And so thank you for raising that. I know that the Malama Ohana Working Group is specific to CWS, but how do we expand that and make it a little bit more broader and work together in all of this? So.
And the children, I mean, Native Hawaiians are overrepresented, so it is an acute problem, but all kinds of children get taken away from their families, right? Like, and all of those children, no matter what color they are that much more likely to end up in jail. So it's not just Hawaiians who have that outcome, right? So it's in all of our interests. I also think one of the themes that we're talking about here is follow the money. So, the foster care system is another thing where you've got this pernicious economic incentive, right? Because, and there's been some work on this that if people are curious, I encourage you to go watch some powerful documentaries that are not hard to find on the economics behind the foster care system, where a lot of families, they lose their children because they're basically poor. right? They become homeless, and then all of a sudden, you know, they're not a safe home. It's not in the best interest of the child to be with them while mom and dad have to live out of their van, right? So they become poor, so the kids get taken away, and then they go to a family who is getting paid an amount of money to take care of them that if we gave that money to their parents, they wouldn't be houseless, right? So I think also, but that's creating the incentive to actually, that body of folks who are able to take those funds, that's creating incentive to keep that situation as it is. Does that make sense? So following the money is really important. And there are things that we can do in law and policy to stop creating the economic incentives for breaking up families and putting people in jail.
Okay, here's one from the online crowd. With the severity of overcrowding in jails and prisons, why is early release to ease overcrowding not used regularly in Hawaii? I'm not sure if that assumption is correct.
Why is what release?
Why is early release not used to ease overcrowding?
Well, I wish there were a judge on the panel to answer that one. Early release in what? Well, I guess.
Well, if it's in prison, I mean, it's up to the parole board, right? And that's all I'll say.
Any more questions from the audience in here? Well, I've got a couple more. On the philosophy of retributive versus restorative justice, is it more based in regional or social culture, example Europe, or does it source from religion, example Catholicism? And then there's a second part. If punitive mindset may be based in religion, does this strengthen the case for restorative justice as a separation of church and state? It's a long one.
Sorry, I don't know. I'm not an expert on European history. I know that definitely the United States imported this because this concept is imported from English law. So like, ironically, we were breaking away from England, we being the United States, breaking away from England, but actually you need a lot of law to jumpstart a country. So if you folks don't know this, what they did is they're like, we have a new constitution, but unless it's in this constitution, we're actually adopting everything from England because we don't have all the laws we need. So we're just going to start there. So that's how you know that, you know, we imported this from England. But that's a really good question about the role of, you know, different major religious sects. I mean, law in general does reflect the morality and the worldview and the values of the people, right? Like, because we create this law one way or the other. It's not always through democracy, but one way or the other, like we're acquiescing to a law even if we don't vote for it, you know, through the governance structures that we choose to peacefully coexist within. So they always reflect what people think and feel in that society. So of course it is going to reflect religious themes, but I don't know about a specific major religion, and you know, that's outside of my understanding, my knowledge.
Hello? Any more questions from the audience? Okay, I have a couple questions, and I don't necessarily expect you all to answer these today, but I think if they're jumping off points for the kind of conversations we can continue to have, maybe we can be thinking about these as well as some of the other points that you all brought up. It seems like we have two sort of pathways that we're looking at that are intertwined. One is the long-term cultural shift in how we think about these issues, and the other would be the short-term, what can we do now as we work toward the long-term goal? So two questions. One, have any of you or any of your entities ever worked on the idea of ho'oponopono within the probation context? Since I think it was Wookie that mentioned that we are #1 on length for probation. And then my second question on the bail reform, because I think it's very instructive to learn that even after that bill passed, we haven't really gone down on our numbers as far as pretrial detainees. And one of the factors that courts look at, in addition to whether or not the person is a danger to society or the community, is whether or not they're going to show up for court. So is there anything practically that our organizations can do, including the judiciary, to work on getting folks into court so that that particular factor doesn't become such of an issue when the courts are looking at, release versus setting some type of bail or keeping folks in. So if you want to try to answer, fine. If we want to just think about it, that's okay too. I think we're running a little bit short on time. So maybe we can continue to have these conversations as we move forward. But if you have any comments on those, I would love to hear them.
Well, I can answer really briefly on at least for the pretrial. I mean, one of the things that that people have been doing and has been implemented here is using notifications to ensure that people show up. A lot of times people, I mean, this is probably, many of people listening to this probably have heard this or seen research and studies or know of this, but in general, there's a lot of evidence showing that a lot of times people miss court not because they're trying to avoid it or avoid responsibility, they just forget, or stuff comes up and they don't know how to communicate that they need to reschedule. I mean, a whole range of things, transportation, childcare, and it seems like such a simple solution, just like your dentist reminds you, so you don't forget your appointment a couple months or 6 months later, you get a reminder with the information that you need. And I believe that's something that has been rolled out here and is a really good practice to have, something that's, well, in theory, it's straightforward, but if you're talking about technology and sending out e-notifications, that's a whole other conversation. But that's, I know, one example. And I think, as we talk about pretrial, I think that's something. Are there other examples of, like when we talk about if you want to release people, how do we find diversion options? How do we find these other options? I mean, there's a lot of really great ideas in theory, but how do we get those resources and those solutions together? Because many of them, I mean, the court notifications is within kind of the court's power, and there's coordination still with the prosecutors, but a diversion program that takes 10, 15 different people at state and county level. And I think that's where the challenge is even if you have some of these ideas, how do you implement them? How do you roll them out? Which I guess is the other opening question that I'm leaving with.
Yeah, I would second that. I mean, there have been so many studies showing that the vast majority of people are not intentionally choosing not to show up in court. There are all kinds of other reasons why someone either is unable or, unable, right? And so in some jurisdictions, text notifications are a thing, right? What are the ways that we can help folks show up to court? Because even I'm thinking back to one of our houseless clients, and he got a written citation with a court date on it. He showed up to court on that date, and he was told, oh no, you don't, it got rescheduled. And then he showed up the next day, and he couldn't figure out what was happening, right? And so he kept trying to show up, and he just didn't know what was going on. And at some point, he got penalized by whatever judge for having missed the actual rescheduled court date. And so we should not be penalizing people like that who are legitimately trying to show up in court, but because of other obstacles, like being houseless, like having to live in public spaces without access to electricity, internet, etc., right? And so we need to rethink, and that's why it's so important to include the perspectives of those who are impacted, because for a housed person, the idea of, oh, well, I can just log on to Jeff's and I can just look it up. It's easy. It's easy if you have access and if you have privilege, but it's not if you don't.
There's a movement, I think it started in Oregon, around peer support specialists as workforce and as those lived experience people to help folks that are going through these sort of things make their appointment, help them to whatever. But I would like to, we have some here in Hawaii and they're certified and it's a bona fide livable wage job. And Hawaii should be investing more into that because the efficacy and the evidence behind that is like through the roof. So.
So with that, I would like to thank all of you folks so much for this incredible conversation. I know I'm speaking for myself and for everyone in the room and on Zoom. I learned so much and I have a lot to go home and think about. And I appreciate all of you for making time, for dealing with the reschedule, and for sharing your mana'o with us tonight. And I want to say thank you also on behalf of the community for all that you do within our community. So to close, I would like to invite Ruth O, the co-chair of the Hawaii State Bar Association Civic Education Committee, up to the podium to share some closing remarks.
Good evening and mahalo to everyone for joining us this evening in celebration of civil liberties and the Constitution Day. On behalf of the Hawaii State Bar Association Civic Education Committee, together with the King Kamehameha V Judiciary History Center, we are so deeply honored and committed to celebrating and co-sponsoring this local event, as we have done every year since 2013. For this also, we express special appreciation for Chief Justice Rectenwald. We thank him for his leadership and support in advancing civic education in Hawaii and for hosting many programs here at Ali'iolani Hale on or around January 30th. Why January 30th? January 30th coincides with the birthday of US-born citizen Fred Korematsu, whose life story challenged the constitutionality of imprisoning approximately 120,000 Japanese Americans during World War II. This was after President Franklin D. Roosevelt issued Executive Order 9066 on February 19, 1942. And so our committee respectfully and relevantly refers Hawaii's Civil Liberties and the Constitution Day as Korematsu Day. January 30th is our day here in Hawaii to celebrate and honor the courage, experiences, and stories of all brave individuals and community leaders, such as those who you've heard today, who inspire individual and community civic engagement and conversation as a way of addressing challenges and wrongs and making them right. So for everyone, we hope to see you in person or on Zoom Thursday, February 20th, as we are hosting our second program of the series entitled Resources and Operations, Sustainable Solutions for the Future of Hawaii's Justice System. And it will be here, same time, same place. But for now, for those of you who are here in person, we welcome you to join us in starting more conversations now. And will you please all join me in a round of applause for our outstanding speakers and participants today? Thank you.